This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. We're so glad you're tuning in today, helping take our leadership to the next level. We have Dr. Richard Blackaby in studio.
Well, thanks to be with you, Sam.
You know, I have to say, it's always a pleasure to host you here on your own podcast, and your hair is looking great today. I will say, I noticed you've been to the barber.
I have. I don't get. It's hard to get a free day to do that when I'm in town, so I just hack it off. So
well, you know, I always say, it's good to be positive and
yeah.
and to treat people nicely and you know, I could have said a lot of negative things about you today.
That's right.
But I chose not to.
I commend you for that. And that reminds me actually of a story I heard one time.
Oh boy.
of a widow that was grieving the loss of her husband, and people were saying it's really tragic. You know, when he was really fighting for his life there, the doctors were trying to discover what his blood type was, and nobody could find out. And he died before he could get a transfusion. And but the wife, the grieving widow, just always held close to her. The final words that he said as he was passing was, "Be positive." So that's kind of what we want to talk about today. Thanks, Sam, for setting me up on that. But
I guess you're welcome. I guess I'm the one to blame for that. So I'll.
But you know, we've talked about this before, but I think it's always good just to circle around to say, as my dad always said, with just about everything that you talk about, there's a positive way to say it and a negative way to say it. And as a leader, I think you just need as much as you possibly can to always opt for the positive way. And what I've seen, and I'll see this in myself at times too. I'm not trying to say and you know this, when we talk about stuff in the podcast, it's not that I'm just the perfect expert, but just observing and we're journeying in leadership, trying to improve. And so there's times where if I audit what I'm saying, I'll realize I perhaps have kind of slid into a slump of negativity, and not always just woe is me, but I have been maybe opting for just saying things a bit more negatively.
Having a critical spirit, those sort of things.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just, for instance, you know, there's if you're talking to your staff, if you're talking to your congregation, you're talking to your leadership team, you can inspire them by seeing the positive, saying things in a positive way. It does, and what I mean by that too is it doesn't mean that you're not addressing problems. It doesn't mean that you never talk about things that are difficult. It's just that you talk about them in a positive way. So you address problems, you address issues, you address difficulties, but you approach them in a positive way. And there's a huge difference. And I hear people now and then, and oftentimes it's a warning sign to me for a leader, when they start to just say everything with a negative bent. You know, it's interesting. I was reading in John 3, and you remember John 3:16, of course, probably the most famous verse in the Bible, about God so loved the world in this way and so on. But verse 17 has always kind of been interesting to me because it says, remember the end of verse 16 says, so that, you know, everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. But then verse 17 says, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And of course, the verse right before that talks about not perishing. So you know that the stakes are high. And yet Jesus turns around though, and he puts it in a very positive way. Because, of course, if you reject Jesus, there's going to be consequences. But what he says is, this whole thing, this whole gospel is not so that people can be condemned and found wanting. The whole purpose of God is very positive. It's so that anyone who believes can be saved. Of course, there's always a negative and a positive way to see that.
Sure.
If you reject it, then you're not going to be saved. And so you could have said, Jesus has come so that all those who reject him can get their just reward. But he doesn't do that. He says, I've come so that people can be saved. People can have free gift of salvation. That's a very positive way of saying the same thing. And so I wanted to just talk a bit about that, because there's a lot of different ways where even just the way you say something, you can take the wind out of your volunteers or your staff, your congregation, or you can breathe life in. So for instance, let me just give you some just practical examples. Maybe you've needed 10 people to volunteer for something. I need 10 volunteers, and a week later you've got 6. So you've fallen short. You were really hoping that you'd fill all 10 spots and that would be taken care of. So now how do you report that? Do you say, hey folks, last week we announced we needed 10 volunteers. We only had 6. Only 6 of you signed up. We needed 10. And so now you maybe put them on a guilt trip. Instead of saying, folks, last week I told you we were looking for 10 volunteers. We've already got 6 signed up. And I really appreciate those who stepped up. And you folks have just always been so good at that. And I'm absolutely confident we'll get the other 4.
Only 4 spots left.
Only 4 spots left. Yeah, last week there were 10. Now we're down to only 4. But you see the difference? Some people are frustrated and zeroing in on the fact that 4 people, they fell short of the goal. And sometimes, that happens often with goals. We've got a goal to raise so much money. We've got a goal to sell so many products. We've got a goal to raise so much funds for this building project. And we're only halfway there. And it's kind of like the glass half full, half empty. Do we say we still got a long ways to go? We still got hundreds of thousands of dollars that we need to account for? Or do we say, hey, folks, we just passed the halfway mark. We're making progress. We've got over half of it in now. And I see this all the time where some people just choose to celebrate the positive and others just can't help but kind of highlight where we've fallen short, where we failed at this point. And I don't think that they necessarily see the impact it has on their people. If you are routinely following a leader who always tends to highlight the negative, you're going to have a demoralized, uninspired group of people. And if you follow someone that is always excited about the positive that's happening, they're not saying it's all done yet. They're not saying the work is over. They see reality, but what they're celebrating is the progress that's been made so far. And if you've ever had to follow someone, you know which kind of person you want to follow. I've shared before, but I had someone when I went to seminary. The school was quite down in a lot of different ways, needing a lot of help. And so I'm just reporting all the exciting things that I feel like God is doing. And every time God provided, it wasn't like things were perfect by any means, but there were certain things God was doing and some progress we were making here and there. And I actually had one person say, Richard, I think your favorite word in your vocabulary is the word excited. You use it in every report, every announcement, every memo. And I said, well, I am excited. I'm excited about the progress we're making. And because I was trying to, not just for me to look at the positive, but to help everybody else. And of course, that's why if you're a leader, it's so important the perspective you take, because it's in a sense, it's been said, the leader focuses the projector. Where he decides to focus is where his people are going to tend to focus. Yeah. And so if you want to keep on reminding everybody that you guys have still fallen far short of the goal, well, that's just not inspiring. It's not motivating.
Well, I think people are very much aware of, like if you haven't met a goal, I think everybody knows that. Yeah. And I think because of sort of humanity's negativity bias, like we don't need to be reminded that we have fallen short of something. And so, like you said, I think it is important to highlight the positive aspects of it, because I think the people you're leading, I would assume, probably already have that negativity bias and are probably already feeling like, well, we've only gone halfway, or we're falling short in this direction. But there is that impulse, I think, in everyone to highlight the negative aspect of it, because I think it's for a good, they're motivated by good reasons because they want to achieve. But like you say, it's better to highlight the positive because that inspires.
It's frustrating if maybe it's taking longer than you hoped for, and you know there's people there that could have given, that could have bought, that could have volunteered, and they haven't yet, and so that they can get in your head.
Yeah.
But if you're not careful, you're going to start spinning out a negative influence on folks, and so you're running a company, and you sales need to increase, and they're not at the level yet that they really need to be, but there is a slight increase. There is at least a trend in the right direction, if ever so slight, and sometimes just celebrating that slight increase, that at least we're in the positive here. When I went to a small church, and I'm not saying that you have to necessarily do this, but even after I'd been there a year or so, the giving we weren't setting any records. Our numbers were not spectacular yet, but the numbers were all better than they had been the year before. Mm-hmm. And so we had a bulletin back then, but we would list attendance and giving as it was last week. And then I started having us listed from the year before. Well, yeah, we didn't have a massive crowd last Sunday, but hey, it was about 20% higher than it was the year before. We're running 20% higher. And all of a sudden, if all you saw is what's there at the moment, you might think, well, it's still not that big of a crowd. But I wanted people to know, but it's bigger than it was.
Yeah,
we're
it's setting
making
that
progress.
perspective.
And I've had people say, I remember we set a record, and I had been there, the most people that we had. And I'm celebrating that. And of course, I had a woman that had to come and tell me she remembered years and years ago when they had a bigger crowd than that before the church had slid into a perpetual decline, free fall. And her numbers were a little inflated, I discovered. But I wanted to say, well, yeah, this church has been in a 10-year-long free fall. But I'll tell you what, compared to last year or the year before that, this is the best we've done in years. And so I'm going to focus on that. Not where we were 15 years ago, but compared to the last 2 or 3 years, compared to when I first walked in these doors, it's positive. So you kind of set the stage of this is what we're going to measure. This is what we're going to celebrate. This is what we're going to focus on.
Yeah.
And I've used some examples in various settings before, but for instance, if you go to a church, maybe it's in the summer doldrums and there's a lot of people away, and so you'll have maybe someone making the announcements or the pastor, and they'll say, well, we have a lot of people away today. The first thing they may say is, we got a lot of our regulars that are out of town or on vacation this week, and I know you kind of want to just let people know if you're visiting that normally we're not this low. We normally have a few more than this. But of course, if you're there in the room and what you're hearing about is all the people who aren't there, another way of saying it is, hey, I know that our church family needs to get some vacation time, and I know you need to get away and rest. We're so glad that for those who've been able to, but hey, I'm just really glad that you're here today. And thank you for coming today, because I just know you're here, I'm here, God's here. This could be an awesome day. Let's just hold your hats and see what God does today. But sometimes I hear people that all their focus and what they bring attention to is who's not there. And I would say that doesn't do any good to point out that a lot of people are away today. Instead, celebrate the ones who made it. Maybe they just didn't have enough money to go on vacation this summer, but they're there, and so make them feel special. Make them not feel like you just wish that the others were there too. And I hear that a lot, and I just think, well, okay, that person just put a downer on the room. They got up, and they could have helped everybody be excited about being there. Instead, we all are reminded of the fact that there's a whole lot of people away. That doesn't encourage anybody, but kind of a negative pall just kind of goes out over the congregation. And so my thought was, if I have a chance to speak in public or even just one-on-one with someone, how can I say something in a positive way? And of course, there's some classics that if you're a pastor, and especially pastors, if your church does something like a response time, an altar call or something, There's some famous ones, and I used to struggle with all these when I was in a little church that was struggling and didn't have a lot of people. If we had an altar call, I might say something like, God may have spoken to you today. And of course, that's really kind of a negative. That's assuming maybe God didn't speak to a bunch of people. And so I would say, no, God has spoken. God has spoken today. I sought a word from God. I faithfully preached his word as best I could. And God says his word never returns to him empty or void. And so I know he's spoken today. But then I would say, and some of you might want to respond. And again, God had to say, no, say, I know you're my people. I know you have a heart that desires to respond to God. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody's going to walk the aisle, but don't say you might, that you may. There might be someone in this whole room that actually got something out of what I just spent 40 minutes talking about.
Yeah.
Say things in a positive way. And then I would say something like, you might want to respond. And I would say, well, no, you're going to want to respond. You love Jesus. Now that doesn't mean you have to walk down the aisle. You might want to bow your head and pray, but you're going to make a commitment even where you're standing right now, to live differently this week. But however you respond, I know in your heart that's what you want to do. Well, it's amazing if you start speaking positively, how people tend to respond more positively to what you said. And so even things like, we're going to have a special men's breakfast next Saturday. I really hope that you're going to come. I know a lot of people are busy, and I know that Saturday's kind of you have a lot of chores to do. But we're really hoping that we'll have a good turnout. Well, that sounds negative. Is there a way to say, hey, we're working really hard to make this very worth your while to get out of bed and come on a Saturday morning, and I'm really excited. I've heard about what they're cooking for breakfast, and we've got a really outstanding program, and I can't wait for you to be blessed by what's going to happen. There's a world of difference between, last time we didn't have that great of a response, so we're really hoping that there'll be more people will come next time.
I know it's earlier than you normally get up, and make the effort.
And so, just turning it to a positive instead of a negative. And I've talked a bit about this before, but of course you haven't mentioned yet, but hockey season is about to start.
That's right.
It is starting, but the actual season starts here right away.
It must have slipped my mind.
And but I'm reminded again, of course, of the Buffalo Sabres. Thanks for bringing that up.
Oh, right. The Sabres.
But a couple years ago, there was a different coach, and they had two players in particular that got kind of in the doghouse because they weren't playing defense the way that this coach wanted them to.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did is he basically got in their heads and made them afraid to fail, made them afraid to make a mistake. And so they were playing to not make a mistake. Well, eventually that coach got fired. They hired a different coach, and he completely reversed things and turned it on a positive bent to say, I want you to play to succeed. Don't play not to fail. Play to succeed. Well, those two players have banner years. They had record points and record successes. And it's all a matter of what you help people focus on. If you put fear into them, don't fail, don't mess this up, don't disappoint me. Well, that's a very negative way, and it does not inspire people to reach new heights.
Well, and I'll commend you too for putting such a positive spin on
the Buffalo
Sabres. That was pretty remarkable.
Well,
I'll have to say that's a special, unique skill to be able to do that.
That's a gift.
You've had so many decades
I've had
being able
a century of practicing that. Maybe just one or two last things. Just again, learn to celebrate successes and small wins. Because you're going to probably have a lot more small wins than big wins. They're more common. But don't wait until you get the whole goal accomplished, until you get the big picture all finished, the whole building project done before you celebrate. Learn to celebrate along the way. Celebrate the small steps, the small wins and victories, the little accomplished, the contributions that people made that you can thank and highlight. because leadership in large part is about building momentum. And momentum, once you build it, can become very powerful, and it can keep on going. But you can't. One speech doesn't necessarily. One PowerPoint presentation doesn't necessarily build momentum.
Right.
That requires day in and day out, week after week of celebrating positive gains, celebrating advances here and there, little victories here and there, and you keep celebrating it and affirming people and giving recognition and thanks to those people for what they're doing. Instead of highlighting the people that aren't doing anything, celebrate the ones who are. And I've always felt like that was unfair when maybe in a church or something, and the pastor is frustrated with those who aren't coming to the meeting, and they're not volunteering or they're not giving. And then he has very little thanks and praise for those who are. I would say just don't. And of course, we've talked about this too, but like, instead of listening to the many people and focusing on the ones who really appreciate your leadership, you're fixated on the handful of critics, the negative ones, and I think that's a classic example where if you don't stay positive, it can sink you because you get sunk by obsessing over the negative, whether it's the opponent, the criticism, and so I want to try to always look to the positive. And again, it doesn't mean you're denying reality. I think there's a way to stare problems right in the face, but then take a positive approach to them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we still have a big debt that we've got to pay off, but hey, we knocked off, almost 5% of it last year. We owe 5% less than we did last year. And boy, I tell you, at the end of the year, it was getting stronger. I think this year we'll even knock off more. And well, it doesn't deny the fact you've got a debt to pay off, but you're highlighting that there are trends and things that certainly are positive, and we want to celebrate that and pray that it gets even more positive in the year to come. And so I think a lot of this comes down to your view of the future, because leaders are always looking for people to sign on to go with them, whether you're a pastor, you're running a company, whether you're trying to build a talented leadership team. And people have got to ask, why would I follow this leader? And if it's just a simple question of, well, who pays the most money, that's one issue. But when people are investing their life, they want to go to positive places. They want to be a part of something that is positive. And if all they ever hear about is where everyone's still fallen short, where we haven't arrived yet at the destination, well, then people are going to say, do I really want to invest the next 25 years of my career in a place where 25 years later, all we ever heard about was where we fell short, where we didn't do what they thought that we should do. And maybe just one last thing to say about that is just, I think, again, that's why you need to have a sense of humor, because humor can put a positive spin on something even when maybe it's not all positive. Of course, most things aren't entirely positive. I remember when I came to be the pastor of this little church, they had been in decline for a number of years, and so it was kind of like a ghost town compared to what it used to be. And so at a certain point, and I don't necessarily encourage people to do this. I don't know if I would do this now, but we had kind of a high attendance day just to try to see. And all we're really trying to do is try to see if all of the people we have now showed up on a given Sunday, how many people would we actually have? And so we just kind of encourage everybody to come. You can invite friends, obviously, but mostly we just want to see how many people do we have, because you never really see them on a typical Sunday. There's always people that aren't there. But what I did is I gave them a challenge. I said, okay, here's the goal, what we're trying to shoot for. It would be by far the most people that we had since I had been there as pastor. And I said, if we make the goal, then I will sing solo as the pastor. And of course, anyone who knows my singing ability knows that would be quite a sight. It would be quite embarrassing for me. And so,
now is that a positive?
Yeah, I was saying.
Or is
well, that's a lot of people debated that.
Yeah.
And so what happened was we ended up falling just short. We didn't quite make the goal. And of course, so I could be disappointed. I could
Relieved. Maybe.
Yeah, I was relieved. I definitely did not want to sing, and I have to this day never had to sing a solo in front of people. But it came close. We came awfully close, and we had more people there on that Sunday than we'd ever had anyway. We did set a record. It just wasn't the goal that we had. We almost made it, and so we had one of my deacons actually was laughing afterward, and he told, and I kind of shared this with all the people. He had said, yeah, I was kind of standing there in the parking lot. I thought, do I make sure I come in and try to help us get the goal, or do I stay out in the parking lot and save the congregation from having to hear Richard sing? And so, so when I shared that in the end, I said, well, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is we didn't quite make our goal, but the good news is, I want to end on a positive note. That means you don't have to hear me sing. And so it ended. I mean, so number one, it was a great win for us. In that we did increase our attendance, but because I made it funny, we didn't focus on the fact we fell just a handful short. Instead, it became something to laugh about and have fun with, and then to say next year we're going to blow right past that goal. And so, but I know other people that could take the same situation, and because they came just short. Instead of celebrating all the sacrifice and all the effort and the work that went into that, they'd point out that we fell 3 or 4 people short or something. And everybody kind of comes away and says, well, why did I work so hard and invite all my friends? And then all the pastor pointed out was that we failed. And so if you want to be the kind of leader that people love to follow, love to journey with, then be the kind of guy that is constantly celebrating the advances here or there. Might be just baby steps sometimes, but you notice them, and you notice the people that take them, and you rejoice with them, and you thank them for what they're doing. And if you'll do that, you'll tend to start building momentum that in time is going to carry you a lot farther than if you just let everybody kind of know you were the expert on what went wrong, what fell short. Don't be that. There's always critics that are experts at that. As a leader, you've got to be the expert in finding the positive. And whether it's big or small, just keep on highlighting that for people, and you're going to build momentum over time that's going to take your organization a long ways.
Well, thanks for the reminder, Richard, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.